Mr. Tony Seneviratne has been dedicated to social and humanitarian work over the last 40 years, during which time he has served and worked in diverse capacities. These have been in the social, technological, and rights-based fields and work. This has ranged from children to youth and adults. From child protection and education, youth development, and especially rehabilitation of drug addicts and youth offenders, helping provide and assist victims of war, natural disaster, and poverty. Mr. Seneviratne has worked with universities and agencies, both local and abroad, in the design and construction of homes and other infrastructure with an emphasis on environment. During his time as the National Director for Habitat for Humanity, Mr. Seneviratne, among many others, single-handedly campaigned and secured a 4,000 housing project from the Indian government, secured a major collaboration with the UK Stock Exchange of over $1.2 million and built 3,200 tsunami houses. He was also the Deputy Chairman of National Child Protection Authority. Mr. Seneviratne has spent much of his life dedicating his time to the upliftment of those less fortunate and the development of children and youth.
Good morning and welcome to Sri Lanka Unites TV. This is a special episode of Outstanding Role Models. Last year we had the privilege of recognizing 10 Sri Lankans for their outstanding contribution to the betterment of society and for the enrichment of Sri Lankan culture, economy and development in many fronts. It's an absolute privilege for us to spend today live on our Facebook channel interviewing some of the role models that we highlighted last year. Today we're going to begin our session by interviewing Mr. Tony Seneviratne, the former National Director for Habitat for Humanity and an individual who has contributed a great deal to civil society in Sri Lanka and even now continues to contribute for the betterment of Sri Lankan society. Mr. Seneviratne, thank you so much for joining us here at the studios.
Been my pleasure, Prasan. I'm honored to be here. It's a privilege.
It's absolutely our honor. So, one of the things that I'm really excited to talk about is not only is Mr. Seneviratne an amazing civil society leader, but you have been a mentor and advisor to Sri Lanka Unites. You've been on our board of trustees from the very inception, and also you've been a personal mentor to myself as well. And we are so proud and privileged that you took some time to talk with us today. Oprah Winfrey once said, a mentor is someone who allows you to see the hope inside yourself. And I think that's something that you have done for Sri Lanka Unites. You've always helped us see the hope within the youth, within the movement. And even when there was so much to despair about and so much to be discouraged about, you've helped us see that. So we thank you for that. So before we get into a lot of the details of what you have done and your passions and how you've served the country, I'd like to start about the origins of your life story. Where you went to school, what kind of inspired you growing up, and then some role models that you had in your life to help you get on this amazing path you've been on.
Well, thank you, Prashan. Again, it's been very generous with your praise. I'm not quite sure it's all deserved, but thank you very much. Well, I grew up pretty much living in Colombo 4, Bamlapiti as you are now. I went to school at St. Peter's College. My childhood was a kind of very mixed. I come from what is considered normally that of a dysfunctional family, of broken homes, and at a very young age I kind of even left home and perhaps might have headed for quite a different destination. But at the age of 19, a friend of mine invited me to a Christian youth program, and that ended in a very turning point in my life.
Mm-hmm. And so you said you came from a broken home, you were not really sure where you wanted to go in life, and this event and this gathering gave you some direction and purpose and led you through. What was the next step? Like, you've gone there from a teenager to now being one of Sri Lanka's well-known civil society servants. What was the transition like? How did you go from a young person who didn't see direction to a person who's deeply convicted about ideals and principles and working towards it?
Well, the first thing that happened to me was the realization that I had got a second chance in life to change my life. And my friends whom I had been moving around with were people who also have the same kind of background. And I felt the call to kind of work and to help them. And so at the age of 21 or 22, I can't even remember now, I set up what was an organization called YGROW. Actually, it was started by Youth for Christ, and at that time the leader Sam Sherrod and I was the first full-time worker. In fact, when I got married, I shared my home with 8 drug addicts. And it was a youth drug rehab center and for young offenders from maybe even prison. So that's where it all started. A need to help others who needed another chance in life.
So you saw your situation and you felt if you deserved a second chance, so do these people that many in society seemed beyond help, especially those with drug offense and that kind of background. How did you commit yourself to that level, that extreme, you know, that sacrificial commitment? That's something that many people say, I feel about the issue, I care about this, but I can't take that step. What made you make that step?
Well, in one sense, it wasn't very difficult. I was one of them, and that's where I was. And they were my friends, so that was a very easy step to take at that time. Looking back now, I may have not been the wisest or to start so young and to start such a huge project at that age when I knew very little. But it didn't seem a sacrifice, it didn't seem effort, it just seemed the right thing to do.
Now, I'm sure at a young age when you started this, you had certain role models in your real life or even through history that really inspired you to keep pushing. Who are some role models that you looked up to?
Well, absolutely, honestly, I must say that the role model was and still is Jesus Christ. When I looked at his life, it seemed that it was absolutely something that I could follow. Whereas when I looked around at the models that I had, they were pretty much weak. If you push me into saying it, I would say people like Abraham Lincoln, who led a complete change, people like Martin Luther, both the Martin Luthers, from Protestant Revolution to the Martin Luther who led the revolution for freedom of the black people. Yes, those were models who told me that you could change things. And that was my only role model.
That's amazing. And so from there, when you started this work, initially working with drug offenders and helping them get re-established in society, what were some of the other next steps you took in the sense of other work that you engaged in over the years before you took on this role at Habitat for Humanity as the National Director?
Well, that's a good question, because to help drug addicts, the first thing we realized was that they need to do something. And so we didn't know it at the time, but we took on a role called occupational therapy. So as the moment they came into our center, they had to work. And we had farming, we had carpentry, we even had building. Some of our drug addicts really built 5-story buildings in the end. So it was the question of giving them some work to do so they recovered their dignity. So that was the first step and the thing that always worked with a drug addict. If they didn't have that, where they recovered their value in life and that they could absolutely be doing something worthwhile, then nothing really changed. From there onwards, I began to see another significant problem in society was children. It was when I first heard Maureen Seneviratne, no relation of mine, the great lady, at peace speaking about the problem of child prostitution in Sri Lanka, which Sri Lanka then was known as the number 1 or the number 2 pedophile nation in the world. I was at that time working with Leeds, and I went back and thought, how could we do something to help? It resulted in setting up the organization called Escape, which endures up to today, and another organization that came off that, which finally also got our involvement into the National Child Protection Authority, where I was privileged to serve as the deputy chairman for 2 years. And that felt one of the most worthwhile things that I did, and I still continue to do. So that was the next step in my life. But underlying this was always the commitment, surprisingly, to agriculture and building, because I think the environment and how we look at people and things makes a big difference. So I have been strongly involved and still am in the farming community as well as in the construction community. So that's where I kept going, and until I ended up with Habitat for Humanity, where we tried to, and they are still trying to, we had the introduction of building with earth, and I worked with the University of Moratuwa, with Trada from UK, with using different types of building materials, but specifically earth and simpler material, that people could make themselves and construct their own houses. During the time that I was with Habitat, we were able to complete over 20,000 houses for people who were very poor. But it wasn't a giveaway program. It was, they were actually helped to start saving from 50 rupees a day to build their own house within 6 months to start building.
Absolutely inspiring. So for our young viewers out there, just if you are a 19-year-old who feels like you have no purpose, you have no direction, you don't add value to society, Mr. Seneviratne was you when he was 19. But now as he's sharing his story, helping with drug rehab, standing up against child abuse and pedophilia in Sri Lanka and creating an organization for that, leading Habitat for Humanity to build over 20,000 houses in post-war and post-tsunami Sri Lanka. All of this from a 19-year-old who didn't have any purpose or direction. So this is extremely encouraging and uplifting, because we know many times we talk to young people say, my life, I can't get my life together. How am I going to make an impact? And if you were speaking to your 19-year-old self or somebody who's just like you right now, what are some words of encouragement and even direction that you would give them right now?
I think the most outstanding thing is for people to search for truth. A lot of time people are disillusioned and they don't know what to do because they don't know what is true, what would truly make their life worthwhile. So the first thing I would always say then, which was what my passion was, to find out what is truth. Because of the young people I had seen that, as a young person I had seen that so many people don't say the truth. They say one thing but they mean something completely different. And that's where I would start with any young person.
Okay. So remain true to yourself and believe in the truth and pursue truth. In your opinion, looking at modern day Sri Lanka, what are some of the most pressing challenges that you feel the next generation needs to tackle now before it's too late?
Well, there are so many, but at the top of my head, I would think that fighting corruption, because corruption in society, corruption in our country, corruption in our actions or behavior eventually leads to the denigration of all society. Today it is becoming normal for people to accept corruption and say, well, that's the way it is. You can't be honest and be a success. But if people can really turn around and say, no, I can fight corruption and I will fight corruption and I will try to be honest, I will try to practice integrity. But the problem is that it also has another word that is underlying this, and if you are going to take that role on, it would be self-sacrificial, because it would mean that you would have to sacrifice things in your life if you are going to fight corruption.
Yeah. So you segued very well into our last question. Sri Lanka Unites has just published 8 modules for us chapters in universities and schools, and one of the modules is youth leadership and character. And these interviews are going to be recorded on a DVD and provided for all the students across the country. And so we've highlighted 6 main attributes a person needs to have good character. We've said integrity, honesty, loyalty, self-sacrifice, accountability, and self-control. You've already highlighted honesty and self-sacrifice and integrity as a very crucial parts of good character. Would you want to elaborate a little bit more on that? How can a young person in a society that says otherwise go against what they're saying and live these virtues and be an example?
I think they got to find for themselves what kind of role model they would pursue in life. Today the role model that is being pushed on young people is be successful. We used to have a song that we used to sing, get the money while you can. It doesn't matter how you do it, just be a happy man. So today it's all about being happy, it's all about finding success, and it's all about wealth becomes a part of it. If young people are looking at life and saying, that's not really what I want and where I want to go, then they have begun the process of change. But once you pitch your tent in that arena of success, happiness and wealth, then it's very difficult to follow the models of integrity and all of those words you mentioned.
extremely well said. And Sri Lanka Unites, we always mention, we have to live beyond the parameters of our own selfish ambition. If this generation doesn't sacrifice, we will not see a great Sri Lanka, and we have a long way to go. So thank you for being a role model, being an inspiration. And I just want, in closing, if you could share, why are you hopeful for Sri Lanka's future?
Well, my hope would always remain with young people. It is much more difficult to change people in the latter part of their life because they have already got stuck into a system. If we are going to change Sri Lanka, then it has to be with changing the minds and ideas of young people. In their schools, the education system, everything, that's where you got to pitch your tent to make the change. Whatever you say, and I mean, it is important to take action so that even everybody, young or old, can make a difference and can change. But it's the young people who will really make the change if we are going to change the future for Sri Lanka.
Wow. I said it was in closing, but I just realized that there may be some young people watching who want to get involved in the very fields that you have impacted. Drug rehab, to helping against child abuse, or development, building houses and sanctuary, and also the work of peace and reconciliation. What are some ways that they could get involved? What are some organizations that you would recommend and say these are something that you should look to as a stepping stone for you to get involved in these things?
Okay, I would be a little hard pressed to keep mentioning organizations because then it puts a lot of pressure on people to say that, well, those organizations are wrong or they are. But just like your organization that is, or should I say our organization that is working with young people, there are others. And if young people look around them in their schools, wherever it be may, they can start with a small situation. They can volunteer with groups that they know or they think to be true, and then see how it goes. But I think it all begins with being a volunteer. If you volunteer with any group, no matter what it is, as long as it's a group that holds true, that could be the starting place for you.
Okay. So there you are. Thank you once again for joining us on this episode of Outstanding Role Models. We were with Mr. Tony Seneviratne, and we want to encourage you. If you want to follow up with some questions to Mr. Seneviratne, please feel free to write to us on our Facebook page, and we would get the questions to him, and we would ensure that there will be some answers from him to you as well. So if you want to engage and learn more from him. Mr. Seneviratne, thank you once again for being an inspiration, for all the hard work. I know sometimes in our society we don't recognize the work that's done, the many years of sacrifice, the many years of service, the thousands of lives that have been touched. Thank you for not just the work you did, but for the inspiration that has caused for a new generation to keep going. So thank you once again for joining us.
It's been my privilege. Thank you, Prashant.
Don't leave us. We'll be right back with more episodes of Outstanding Role Models.